live. Good morning. It is Wednesday, October 3rd, 2018. I can't believe we're in October already. And for those of you who are political junkies like me, we're within 35 days. What are we, 33, 34 days, something like that, until the election. And we'll be talking a little bit about that along the way, I am sure. And we'll talk a little bit about it today. And we're delighted you're here. And as always, if you're here with us live, that's great. And if not, and you're picking it up on orangeslice.com, we like that too. Or maybe you're just listening in the gym while you're running on the treadmill. That's what I should probably do more of, but you're catching it on the podcast on Podbean. You can get information about all of that if you go to orangeslice.com. So what are we doing today? Well, we're going to do a little bit on news, and our feature is going to be How to Speak Millennial. I've got a good one for you that you can use in your conversation with your 20-somethings that work and play with you, and we'll do all of that. And then we're going to do sort of a commentary. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the ramifications of the things that we've been seeing in the news. So it'll be an interesting show, I hope, for you, and we're always anxious to hear what you have to say. So let's get started. And I'm not going to do a national story because really some of what I'm going to talk about is dovetailed off of a national story, but I'm going to do a state story, and we'll skip the local. I'll tell you a little bit about sports, and then we'll move on. Here's the big state story of the day. This is actually in the newspaper, so it's being reported on. That's how big this is. Southern California, are you ready? Could see significant amounts of rainfall today. That's right, between 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. today. Write it down in your calendar, October 3rd. We might actually get water falling from the sky. We don't see rain in Southern California, but we might get it everywhere in California, apparently. There's supposed to be heavier cells migrating from the coast as part of some of these storms that are coming through. An even heavier cell could hit the Inland Empire around 7 p.m. tonight. They say we might get as much as a half inch of rain. Now, you know California is really, there are places where you get a half inch of rain in an hour. We get a half inch of rain across a day, and it becomes stellar news. So that's our state news story of the day. We could get wet. Stay tuned. We'll probably talk about it some more. You'll probably see it all over the news. We actually may have rain. And I purposely didn't wash my car because I knew that they were predicting that we might have rain. So there you go. I was thinking ahead. Everybody on staff is smiling at me like, that's not why you didn't wash the car. All right. Let's talk a little national news story, and then I'll dovetail off of it. So in one that I just couldn't avoid because I read this quote, and the quote was so astounding that I had to bring it up. This was a interview that was done at something called, what festival was Clinton at? This is Hillary Clinton speaking. She was at the Atlantic Festival in Washington. Not sure what that festival celebrates, but she was there and she was being interviewed, and they were asking her about Kavanaugh making statements during his retort to what Christine Blasey Ford had to say, and he, when he was defending himself, said in passing, among other things, that this was retribution by some of the senators for the loss in the 2016 election, where Clinton lost, and said this is about the Clintons. And so she laughed at that notion and said she thought it deserved a lot of laughter. She thought his whole demeanor was very defensive and unconvincing, which you hear a lot from folks who criticize him from the left. And then she said, boy, I tell you, they give us a lot of credit. We started this 36 years ago against Kavanaugh, which isn't exactly what he said, Hillary, but okay, that's a cute spin. And then she added this, and this is where it was astounding and caught my eye when I read this article, and this is why I brought it up. She said she found Ford to be very credible, and many people do, but she said because you have to ask yourself why anybody would put themselves through this if they didn't believe that they had important information to convey. I found her presentation, I found her willingness to say, I don't remember this, but I do remember that, to be very convincing. And then here's the capper. And I felt a great swell of pride that she was willing to put herself out under these circumstances and make the claim. Really, I wonder if Hillary felt the same swell of pride when Juanita Broaddrick made her claims, or Paula Jones, or Monica Lewinsky, or Kathleen Willey. You feel that same swelling sense of pride then, Hillary? That was just an astonishing remark coming from a woman who spent a lot of time savaging her husband's critics. So I just had to share that with you because it was just so astonishing. And that's sort of where I want to pick up this whole Kavanaugh story. We've been talking a lot about it in the last few weeks, but talking about the story itself and the claims and counterclaims and whether they should be believed or not believed. And as early as today, the FBI can complete this supplemental investigation, which, by the way, will turn up nothing new. They're going to interview people who have already made statements under oath. Those people aren't going to contradict what they said under oath and make themselves criminals. So this was really an exercise in just delay for the theater of it all. And so Mitch McConnell announced that he will also be having a vote this week. So the report could come in today, maybe not, maybe so, and the report could be accepted or not, doesn't matter. Mitch McConnell's decided he's putting this up on the floor, and senators are going to take a position, and they're going to have the vote this week, 5 weeks out from the midterms, and he's going to have done with this one way or the other. And that will not be the end of it. That's the point, I think, of the comments that I want to make today. The repercussions and reverberations of this Kavanaugh story will go on for a long, long time, and they will have some significant impacts. And I want to talk just about some that I'm seeing in the press and conversation with people that I hear anecdotally, that I'm picking up on social media, and those reverberations and the profound, perhaps permanent, pervasive impacts of this whole sordid experience on our culture is sort of what I want to touch on. So let's begin by saying there are a number of changes that we're going to see as a result of this whole experience, and not the least of which will be that Senate confirmations will never be the same. If they declined in tenor and in quality when we had Bork up in the Reagan years and got worse during the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas confirmations, they have devolved now to a point of insanity. Screaming in the hallways has now become noise in the hearing room. And noise in the hearing room wasn't enough for activists. Now we've also got people who have descended from the actual dais itself into he said, she said, accusations must be believed, evidence be damned, their own backgrounds in some cases, their own prevarications, their own behavior be damned. They just became critics and moralizers. And I don't think any Senate confirmation will ever be the same again. And that has very profound impacts. I talked about some of this stuff being profound. That changes in many ways the way future nominees will see the process, the way future senators will believe they can behave, the way the public thinks they can behave in the People's House when they come to the hallways and want to be heard. It's now not just a matter of going to a senator's office and trying to petition your point of view, or using lobbyists to try to do it in sophisticated manners where they're working votes and whipping them on an issue or a bill. Now it's come down to trapping a senator in an elevator and screaming at him with a TV camera capturing it all. And it didn't have to be a TV camera. It could have been somebody's iPhone. I broadcast on an iPhone every Wednesday to you. And it reaches as far and wide as people want it to reach. So I think that makes a huge difference and may have tainted forever the decorum of what was once the world's greatest debating body, and now it's just devolved. There are also some repercussions from that for our political process, because it means that we change the manner in which advice and consent takes place. The founders put it in for a reason. They wanted the Senate to be able to confirm what the president did in terms of appointments, so that there were some checks and balances on the system. And now that it's become a Donnybrook, I don't think it will have the same impact and the same respect from people in the body politic. And all of those senators sitting on the current committee, the Senate's Judiciary Committee, you're all to blame for that. Every single stinking one of you that let that process devolve into that. And Chuck Grassley did what he could do, but he's clearly past his prime and didn't wield his gavel well enough. And I would have terminated some of those hearings with some of the noise that was going on in those demonstrations, but that's me. All right, let's talk about some practical impacts. The next thing I want to talk about, there's a whole series of what I think are separate and sometimes distinct but interrelated impacts from this whole Kavanaugh experience. The second is what will happen as a result of this on the national scene 5 weeks from now. We already had contentious midterms. Midterms are always contentious. It was certainly going to be pitched battles in some of these races, but this has sort of changed the tone for a lot of people. It may have shifted what's going on. We were hearing in the weeks leading up to this confirmation hearing and to the midterm elections as separate stories that the confirmation hearings were going to be tough, and that the mid-year elections looked like the president would lose seats in the House. He might gain some in the Senate, but he would lose seats in the House. The House might turn more purple, right? Now, people are saying they're watching the polls and the gap is closing, and it's closing with some rapidity, closing in on the election. And that's not a good sign for Democrats who thought they were going to pick up seats along the way. And the change in that may have come from the fact that people watched the way these hearings were held, and the way, in their view, the character of a good man was assassinated by people who wanted political gain, and they may take retribution for that. And it'll be interesting to see on election night whether or not the blue wave that was supposed to come turns into a blue trickle, turns into a purple wave, turns into a red trickle, or a red wave. Who knows? We will know only when the people have voted. But it's interesting to watch this shift in the movement. Let's take a look just as an example in one race, and I talked about this race before, so I wanted to go back to it because the dynamic has changed now as a result of these hearings. I think we talked a few episodes ago, check me if I'm wrong on this, you viewers who pay careful attention to all of this stuff, about the Dianne Feinstein-De Leon race. And I raised the issue that De Leon was running to her left. He's part of the new sort of millennial movement toward a more democratic socialist Democratic Party rather than a centrist, right-center, a former Democratic Party that has devolved from the days of Kennedy, John Kennedy, to where it is today, right? And that De Leon was running well behind her, but it motivated her to be aggressive because she wanted to hang on to her seat. And by the way, just as a passing remark, she's 85 years old, so she would be 91 when she left office if she won this 6-year term. And that plays into some of the dynamics I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But let's talk about what's happened in this race. De Leon was 22 points behind when the Kavanaugh debacle began. He's not 22 points behind anymore. He's 11 points behind and closing fast. And why is that? De Leon was always going to have the left of his party, and he was going to have young people. He was not going to have independents and moderates, and he wasn't going to have Republicans. And Republicans had no choice, right? They only had De Leon or Dianne Feinstein. Dianne Feinstein's always been kind of a safe place for moderate Republicans to go. They kind of thought she could think her way through things, and then they saw her performance. And then they saw what she did with this letter. And then they saw the lawyers that she referred Ms. Blasey Ford to. And then they saw her violate Blasey Ford's privacy and use it for political purposes. And they got angry. And he closed the gap by 11 points. And that gap is closing, pollsters tell me, daily. And you see conversations now among conservatives and traditional value people and moderates and independents and people of faith in California who are saying, people of old-fashioned American values even, not even of faith, who are saying, that offends me what they've done, and I'm not going to reward Dianne Feinstein with a vote. I'm going to vote for her socialist opponent, even though I don't like him any better. And conservative writers are writing about it. Jim Lacey, who is a well-known political operative from South County, Dana Point, Orange County, and is published across California, runs a Slate operation as well as political punditry, has written that he's going to vote for De Leon. Now, you can't get more conservative than Jim Lacey, right? He's to my right, I think. And he says, I'm voting for De Leon as a punishment for Dianne Feinstein. And he argues he's doing this for political purposes, and he makes some interesting arguments. One, he says De Leon is younger than Dianne Feinstein, so if we give Dianne Feinstein a 6-year term, and we're wildly successful and John Cox becomes the new governor rather than Gavin Newsom, then we have a Republican governor, an 85-year-old senator who's got 6 years left on that term before she gets out. She'll be 91. She might not live to 91, and then the Republican governor can appoint a new senator. So for political purposes, it serves my purposes to have an older 85-year-old senator who's a liberal than to have a younger 30 or 40-something De Leon. I'm not sure how old Mr. De Leon is. So I smile when I hear that, because one, John Cox would have to be Gavin Newsom. I'm sorry, Jim, that ain't gonna happen. And two, we're now deciding who we're gonna vote on based on what the end result might be of a coronary for them some year during their term, and then we'll be able to replace them with a conservative. I don't think that's gonna happen either. But it gives you an interesting feel for how he makes his argument. It's not the only argument he made, by the way. He also said, I'm trading like for like. If I'm going to have a liberal that I can't count on, I might as well have one who is unskilled. In his view, Dianne Feinstein has a certain cachet after all her years in the Senate, and that's true. And she has some expertise and some ability that Mr. De Leon doesn't have, and that, I'll drink to that, Jim, that's true. And therefore, I'd rather have an inept liberal than to have a polished one. All very interesting arguments along the way, but you see the repercussions of what happened at the Kavanaugh hearing now having implications in how conservatives are talking to one another. And this is picking up steam. There's actually a movement of people saying, yeah, I'm going to vote for DeLeon, not because I really think DeLeon would make a great senator. I don't even like his politics, but I want to punish Dianne Feinstein. And if that happens in other races across the United States, in House races and in Senate races and places where people are on the bubble, adios, blue wave. And so the Democrats may have overplayed their hands on this. May have, caution, 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 all of this is punditry. Nobody really knows. Let's talk about the changes to our judiciary that have come from this and from this presidency. Some of it unrelated to Judge Kavanaugh, but it has caused panic among those on the left. It's been true for a lot of people who have paid attention for a long time that the way that the left has gotten some of its policies into our culture is not through legislation. They don't have a lot of the state houses. The legislatures tend to skew red. They don't have a lot of governorships. They tend to skew red. And they haven't been able to get something through the Congress either because the checks and balances and the gridlock that we've had in Washington for decades has stopped a lot of the movement on the left of the policies that they wanted. So how did they get things? They got it through activist judges. They got it through the judiciary. They got it through putting people on the bench that they did that had a liberal skew, and they created all kinds of rights and read all kinds of things into a living constitution that originalists wouldn't buy, and they had enough votes on the Supreme Court to keep those cases from being overturned, and so they had a control over the judiciary, and therefore that's how they got their agenda in. That's how you saw gay rights get expanded. That's how you saw abortion protected. That's how you saw the left win on school issues and a host of others. That's how gun control ran rapid in some of the states and some of the jurisdictions and was protected by the activist courts and where cases were brought and they were won. So now comes Donald Trump, and he does, in his first 2 years, something unheard of from a Republican president. He starts appointing federal judges to the bench like crazy. There was a big gap, a big opening. Obama was pretty lazy about appointments, and in the first 2 years, where Obama had appointed maybe 10 or 12, he's appointed 80, with dozens more waiting in the wings for confirmation, to all kinds of circuit and appellate courts in the United States. And he's appointed one Supreme Court justice to replace one who left, and he's got one more that is the subject of the current debacle, right? So he may overturn 2 of 9 seats in the first 2 years of the presidency, and that has the left panicked, and hence you see what's happening, because if they lose that branch of government, then what? They don't have the legislatures. They don't have a really good shot at this point of taking away the White House. They don't have Congress. Now they're losing the courts, and so that's why you see what's going on. So there's great fallout to the senators that were on the bubble, the Joe Manchins and the Donnellys and the Heidi Heitkamps that were running as Democrats in places where Trump had done very well, where he's stumping, where he's got his machine out working it, where they're getting opposed, where he's going to places like the Carolinas and making speeches against senators who already were in trouble in those districts, and all of what happened in the judiciary from their colleagues and statements from people like Mazie Hirono from Hawaii are all coming to play in those races. So the fallout for the senators is another point of maybe profound change. Let's talk about another thing that came from these things that we have seen. How about the fallout for the witnesses, the accusers, and perhaps for their lawyers, and where all that is going? If in fact you get a confirmation for Judge Kavanaugh, that won't end the look into how Dianne Feinstein got the letter from Blasey Ford, how she violated Blasey Ford's request for anonymity, how it got leaked from her office or some congressman's office. I understand that the Blasey letter was not just in Dianne Feinstein's hands, so let's not look only to her congresswoman, I can't remember the woman's name, from Northern California, also had a copy of the letter, so her staff is on the bubble as well. But the Senate could ask the FBI or others or their own investigators to look into what happened with that letter and how it got out and how it got leaked and where it came from and when. On top of that, they might look at something that I find as an officer of the court profoundly interesting I want the answer to. And that's that Ms. Blasey Ford said in a believable way, because she was very believable, don't get this wrong, her testimony had impact, that she had no idea that Chuck Grassley and the committee would come out to California. She expressed some fear of flying. Some people have called that into question. That's blather. But she didn't want to come to Washington, D.C. And Chuck Grassley and the committee and their investigators said, we'll come to you. We'll do this in private. We'll have a private investigation. We'll interview you where you are in California. And she told the committee, the Senate of the United States, my lawyers didn't tell me that. And I'm telling you, you lawyers from that firm, whoever the hell you are, if you didn't tell your clients she had the opportunity to be protected and she didn't have to fly back and become a media circus on international television before the Congress of the United States, you are in trouble. Your bar ticket ought to be punched. So that could be an interesting and profound ramification that comes from this, and a warning to all other officers of the court. Remember, you're officers of the court. That's really disgusting behavior if it's true. Let's talk about the lasting damage to the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party had already moved so far to the left that it was always almost unrecognizable in recent months. But now it may have lasting fallout from this, because if in fact the people reject this in a significant way in the ballot box, the Democrat Party, who is rudderless, it really doesn't have a leader, save Obama, who seems to be back out on the stump, is going to have to remake itself in some fashion. And what are its values? What does it stand for? What policies is it advocating? It's been silent about what it would do on tax policy, except for Pelosi saying she'd raise your taxes. It's been quiet about what's going on in the trade arena, because the unions, who are their bastion of support in elections, like what's happening in trade, because the president's rewriting NAFTA. That's good for American jobs, and he's gotten Canada and Mexico to agree. They're silent about foreign affairs because he's really got Korea neutralized for the time being, at least, and in talking. They haven't shot off any missiles, and they're not doing any testing. He's gotten Europe to step up and pay for more of their own defense in NATO. He is being tough on the folks around the country and around the world who support globalism. So what is their policy? What do they stand for? We haven't heard it, except for #MeToo, which they picked up from the media and the entertainment industry, not from them. And watching their performance, if it causes a debacle in elections, is not going to help them either. Let's talk about another ramification. Excuse the cough. We have a weather change. As I told you, rain is coming and my allergies have decided to drive me crazy. Let's talk about a significant problem that's come from all of this, the deep divisions in our country. We were already tribalizing, and that's a word that has become popular to date. It was called factionalism by the Founding Fathers. It's been around in politics for 300 years or longer. But the divisions have become deeper over this issue in our country, because some people have become concerned about what the impact will be, not only on the institutions, which is where I've been focused a lot, but where it's going to be on the rest of our lives. And I want to turn there next. Where am I on time, Cece? Let's talk about what has gone on in Congress, thanks, and the mainstream media's drumbeat on this, and what it's doing to the average person and what it's doing itself to the media. By the way, I could do a whole show on mainstream media and how they're becoming irrelevant in the age of social media. We all have phones. We all have ways to get news. We all have laptops and can get to all kinds of sources, and the media's slant has begun to do damage to journalism. A separate show for a separate day. Let's talk about the impact of all of this stuff on the day-to-day lives of men and women, your neighbors, our relatives, your family, and those you work with. Tell me, ladies, are you feeling comfortable about your sons and your husbands and your brothers and your fathers and what they might have to deal with now if they ever have an accusation made against them? If, in fact, the new standard is accusation made, woman must be believed, you must prove your own innocence, we're going to shift the standard now. If we can do it to a Supreme Court justice nominee, we can do it to a man in your family. If the presumption of innocence is going to evaporate in our judicial system, you feeling comfortable about that? Tell me, dads, you feeling comfortable about what you are now going to say to your sons about what their behavior needs to be in high school, in college, how they're going to interact with young ladies in their circle? Going to change the way you talk to them about what the new behavior needs to be based on the new standards? This has real-world implications on young people's lives, and it's not something that we should overlook, because as a parent and a grandparent, I think about it. you hear in social media people talking about it. You say to people, well, I really am concerned about all this going on, and I concern myself because I care about it. Not only as a lawyer or a political activist or as a dad or a former mayor or any other hat that I wore, but as just a human being, about the fact that there are real women who are really abused, who have real claims, who are now all going to be suspect. We're not going to believe any of them, or we have to believe them all, regardless of whether or not they're telling the truth, because the standard has now changed. So people are going to use their own lens in order to see that standard, and we're going to look at that lens through whatever tribe we belong to. It's not a good thing for our country. It's not a good thing for our justice system. It's not a good thing for our young people. I concern myself about that, and we're going to watch those changes. What are you going to say, parents, to your children about what they write in their yearbooks? Or what photos they put on Snapchat. Snapchat, right? That's where you put photos? Photos, yes. Snapchat. See, I got millennials around me. You're going to tell them what they got to be careful about? What they should put there? Can it haunt them 40 years later? Can someone twist that photo or the caption that was used in jest among friends to something that will cost them a job someday, a career, maybe their reputation? These are things we all now have to start thinking about. Employers are starting to think about whether or not they should change their hiring policies or what their policies ought to be about how people use machinery in their office, the computers and the phones and the like that we give young professionals to work. They're starting to talk about those things. They're starting to muse about those things. Human resource people are wondering whether or not they shouldn't teach under their module when they're doing harassment training about what you do with media. That is all an impact that came out of these Kavanaugh hearings. And so all of these issues will last far longer than the report that will come out today or tomorrow, the vote that will happen this week, and the service, for that matter, of Judge Kavanaugh on the bench if he makes it to Justice Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court for whatever decades he's there. It will reverberate through our institutions. It will change the manner in which people look at evidence and the standard of evidence. It will change how we hear claims made by people. You'll start seeing it through a lens. And I warn us not to do that, because once we start doing that, we're letting the tail wag the dog and the noise be the story. So those are the reverberations that came out of what's gone on that I think are just as important as the tortured story we heard from Ms. Ford, who clearly had something happen in her life. Nobody just makes that stuff up whole cloth. Something happened to her. And what we saw senators do to a fine jurist as they decided they would use that story as a bludgeon, corroborated or not, him or not, they would bludgeon his reputation in order to win a political fight. Doesn't matter to them whether he's qualified for the bench or not. The difference between the parties is also something to pay attention to. Republicans didn't do that, even though they had deep disagreements with Kagan and with Sotomayor. They looked at Kagan and Sotomayor and they said, yeah, they're to the left on the political spectrum. Yeah, I'm not going to like some of the ways they're going to vote and the way they may look at cases. But they're qualified people with good backgrounds, they're intelligent, and they gave them seats on the bench. We didn't do that in this case, and that may change forever some of our institutions. Of course, I overwrote the show. I got way more to tell you, and I'm getting fingers pointed at me from Cece, so I know I'm running out of time. And I got to get in a millennial. And I didn't do sports, but I'm going to mention it now, just because if I don't do that, my Trojan friends will get upset. Here's the news on the Bruins. They're 0-4. We suck. That's right. We opened up 0-4 for the season so far. We haven't been 0-4 since, are you ready for this? 1977. In 1977, I was a matriculating student at UCLA, and we were 0-4 in the beginning. And that won't stop me. I'll go to the Rose Bowl this weekend. I'll watch them play Washington. Yikes, Washington. Ugh. I know that my friend Mike Saddam is smiling ear to ear over this, because we're going to get ourselves trounced by the Huskies, and we'll open up 0-5. And that hasn't happened since 77 either. So there's your sports news. Now, how to speak millennial. Okay, boomers, you need to learn to speak millennial. And the word for today is, and these two stories are juxtapositions on purpose. I got this from my brilliant producer, Julie. Trippin'. When someone is overreacting and getting all bent out of shape over something small. The things we were talking about today were not small, except my Bruins story. So in a sentence you would say, why you be trippin'? It's no big deal. Or applied to what was the story of trivia today, it would say, Jerry, why are you tripping about your Bruins? It's just football. Don't be trippin'. All right. we have wrapped the show. I think I may be even close to overtime. We will see you next Wednesday with another show. We have a potential guest I can't announce just yet that would be very interesting to you. And we've got some future shows, including one in which we're going to interview some folks that I think you'll find entertaining. So keep tuning in every Wednesday morning. Have a good week. Make good decisions. Don't be tripping. And I'll see you next Wednesday on Java with Jerry.